Have you ever encountered neighbors who act like they own the entire block? Almost like HOA royalty or something? I always thought such tales were blown out of proportion, until I met Karen. About 6 months ago, I relocated to this neighborhood, and honestly, it appeared flawless on paper. Quiet streets, immaculate lawns, a reasonable commute. Everything I desired. Sure, there was an HOA, which I typically dislike, but their regulations were straightforward. Maintain your lawn, avoid painting your house neon green, sensible stuff. I figured as long as I adhered to the guidelines, I'd be fine. Oh, how mistaken I was. It all began roughly 2 weeks ago when I purchased a new workbench for my garage, something I'd been eager to add for a long time. I'm passionate about woodworking, and now that I had the space, I was ready to get back into it. The delivery truck arrived late in the afternoon, so I parked my vehicle in the driveway to unload it. It was somewhat inconvenient because the workbench was massive, requiring me to rearrange items in the garage to make space. I wasn't obstructing the sidewalk or anything, just parked in my own driveway, taking my time. After about 20 minutes, I heard a sharp, abrupt voice behind me. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" I turned around to see Karen. She's a middle-aged woman with the stereotypical haircut you'd expect. You know the one, arms crossed, lips pursed as if she just bit into a lemon. She was glaring at me like I'd committed a grave offense. Perplexed, I replied, just unloading some stuff. Can I help you?" Her eyes narrowed and she pointed a finger at my truck. "You can help me by moving that. You're blocking access." At this moment, I was still trying to understand her perspective. Maybe she was referring to something I wasn't noticing. I glanced around, but my truck wasn't obstructing anything. The driveway was clear, the sidewalk was unobstructed. The only thing I might have been blocking was the view of my own house. "I'm sorry, blocking access to what?" I asked, genuinely curious. Karen rolled her eyes so dramatically that I was surprised she didn't injure herself. "The sidewalk. This is a shared neighborhood space, and you're obstructing it. People need to walk through here." Not one to escalate matters immediately, I calmly explained, "The sidewalk's clear. I'm parked in my driveway. No one's blocked from anything." Big mistake. Apparently Karen wasn't interested in logic. Her voice grew louder. "This is my neighborhood, and I don't appreciate you bringing this mess into it. We have standards here." She gestured vaguely at my truck, the workbench, and I suppose my very presence. At this point, I was starting to get annoyed. I maintained an even tone, but remained firm. "With all due respect, I'm parked on my own property and I'm not breaking any rules. If I am, you're welcome to show me where it says so." Her face turned red. "I don't need to show you anything. I'm the HOA president. You're violating neighborhood standards and I will be reporting this." Before we continue with the story, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's my dream to once reach 1,000 subscribers. Hope you can help me reach this dream. Now back to the story. I don't know about you, but the whole "I'm the HOA president" thing didn't exactly intimidate me. Still, not wanting to provoke further conflict, I simply responded, "Okay, you do that," and continued unloading my workbench. But Karen wasn't finished. She lingered for another 5 minutes, arms crossed, muttering about disrespectful newcomers and declining property values. I did my best to ignore her, but it was incredibly awkward. Eventually, she left, but not before snapping a few photos of my truck and my house. That's when unease set in. I thought that was the end of it. She would probably vent about me at the next HOA meeting and move on. However, the next morning, a bright orange notice was taped to my door. HOA violation notice, unauthorized vehicle parking. It stated I was violating HOA rules by obstructing community pathways and threatened a fine if I didn't address the issue immediately. The kicker? It referenced a rule about common areas, which didn't apply to private driveways. I double-checked the bylaws, and yes, I was correct. Nothing I did violated the rules. So I sent a courteous email to the HOA board, attaching photos of my driveway and explaining the situation. I included Karen in the email for transparency. Her reply came within an hour, a terse 2-line message stating I needed to respect the rules or face further consequences. There was no acknowledgement of the actual bylaws or any evidence supporting her claim, just vague threats. Still, I chose not to let it bother me. I documented everything, photos, emails, timestamps, just in case. But then, things started to get stranger. The day after my email, I noticed Karen standing at the edge of my property, staring at my house. She wasn't doing anything, not interacting with anyone, just standing there with arms crossed, glaring at my front door as if she wanted to burn it down with her stare. When I stepped outside to ask if she needed something, she spun around and walked away without a word. Later that night, I saw her walking her dog, or pretending to, right past my house for the third time in an hour. Then tire tracks appeared on my lawn. I decided to pause the story here because things truly began to escalate afterward. Suffice it to say, Karen wasn't satisfied with sending passive-aggressive emails, and neither was I. Asterisk, asterisk, update, asterisk, asterisk. You might think that after our initial confrontation, Karen would have calmed down or moved on to another target. But no, things were only beginning. The morning after finding that bogus violation notice, I had already emailed the HOA board to dispute the claim and believed it would be the end of it. However, when I went outside to retrieve the mail, I noticed something unusual. Fresh tire tracks on my lawn. Initially, I thought I was overreacting. Perhaps the tracks had been there for a while unnoticed. But they were right at the edge of my driveway, too precise to be random. Someone had driven onto my grass, and it wasn't me. I stood there for a moment, trying to convince myself it wasn't a big deal, but it felt intentional, like a message. I dismissed it for the time being, thinking it might have been a delivery driver, and went about my day. However, the second violation notice arrived. HOA violation notice, neighborhood aesthetics. This time, the issue wasn't my truck, but my garage. Karen accused me of conducting unauthorized projects that were harming the neighborhood's appearance. Honestly, this made me laugh. All I had done was rearrange some tools and build a small shelving unit inside my closed garage. There was no noise, no mess, nothing visible from the street. How she knew what I was doing was baffling. At this point, I realized Karen wasn't just making idle threats. She was watching me closely. This realization left me both annoyed and genuinely unsettled. Who has the time to obsess over their neighbors like this? I decided to take action. I emailed the HOA board again, attaching more photos and politely requesting clarification on the alleged rule I was breaking. I even offered to show them my garage to prove there was nothing unaesthetic about it. Once again, I copied Karen on the email, hoping she might realize I wasn't someone to be easily intimidated. Her response was almost immediate, a short, passive-aggressive reply stating, "The board has every right to enforce community standards. Please comply or face further consequences." It wasn't just the email that bothered me. It was how quickly she responded, as if she were waiting by her computer for me to push back. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was personal for her, and I had no idea why. A few days later, while cleaning my truck, I noticed Karen walking her dog past my house. Normally this wouldn't be an issue, but it was the third time I'd seen her pass by within an hour. She wasn't even trying to be subtle. Each time she slowed just enough to glance at my house, lingering a bit too long to seem natural. It was unsettling. I told myself it was probably a coincidence, but it kept happening. By the end of the week, it was clear this wasn't a coincidence. Karen was monitoring me. At one point, I decided to confront her. The next time I saw her walking by, I stepped outside and casually waved. "Everything okay, Karen?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She froze for a second, clearly surprised, then forced a fake, tight-lipped smile. "Oh, just making sure everyone's following the rules," she replied. "Right," I responded, letting the sarcasm show. "Well, if you see anything out of line, let me know." She didn't respond, just muttered something under her breath and walked away. Not long after that interaction, I received an unexpected knock at my door. It was Amy, one of my neighbors. We had exchanged a few friendly waves, but I didn't know her well. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if she didn't want anyone to see her. "Can I come in?" she asked. I let her in, and she wasted no time getting to the point. "I heard what happened with Karen," she said. "She's done this before, you know." According to Amy, Karen had a history of bullying new residents. She'd find minor violations and use them as excuses to harass people until they either complied or moved out. Most folks didn't resist. They just paid fines or did whatever Karen wanted to avoid the hassle. "And what happens if you don't?" I asked. Amy hesitated before responding. "She gets creative," she finally said. "Fake violation notices, nasty emails, even complaints to the city about your property. She'll make your life hell." If Amy's account was accurate, Karen wasn't stopping until she achieved her goals, and I had no intention of giving her that satisfaction. A few days later, things escalated further. I woke up to find my trash cans knocked over and garbage scattered across my lawn. Initially, I thought it might have been raccoons or another animal. But then I noticed something odd. The lids weren't just off, they were missing entirely. That's when I reviewed my security camera footage, and what I saw confirmed my worst fears. There was Karen in the dead of night, dragging my trash cans into the street and dumping their contents everywhere. She even kicked one over before storming off. I sat there watching the video, feeling both furious and baffled. Who does something like this? Over a parking spot? For no reason? Aster yisi deserisk asteras de risk. A final update. After witnessing Karen dumping my trash in the street, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I sat in my kitchen, sipping coffee and replaying the video repeatedly, wondering how she thought she could get away with it. It wasn't just the act itself that infuriated me. It was the sheer audacity. I realized I had two choices: let it slide and hope she'd eventually lose interest, or take a stand and show her I wasn't someone she could bully. Honestly, I was tired of defending myself. I decided it was time to involve the authorities. I went to the local police station with my phone loaded with all the evidence I'd gathered. The emails, the violation notices, the footage of her vandalism, and even photos of the tire tracks on my lawn. I wasn't sure how they'd respond. After all, this was HOA drama, not high-stakes crime. But to my surprise, the officer I spoke to took it seriously. After viewing the footage, he nodded and said, "This is definitely vandalism. Let's file a report." The officer mentioned they'd follow up and advised me to avoid direct confrontation with Karen in the meantime. I agreed, though I couldn't help but wonder how she'd react when the police showed up at her door. While waiting for the authorities to take action, I decided to address the HOA board directly. Karen liked to act as if she represented the entire HOA, but technically, she was just the president. The board still had to vote on decisions, and I was betting they'd be much less inclined to support her once they saw the evidence. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for that Friday, and I made sure to arrive early. I entered with a folder full of printouts and a USB drive containing all the footage. Karen was already there, seated at the head of the table with her usual smug expression. But the moment she saw me, her smile faltered. "Oh, Shane," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "What brings you here?" "I think you know," I replied, taking a seat. The meeting began with the usual mundane updates: landscaping budgets, community events, all the typical stuff. But when it was time for open concerns, I raised my hand. "I'd like to address a pattern of harassment from the HOA president," I stated calmly, presenting my folder. The room fell silent. Karen's face turned bright red, but she didn't say a word as I detailed everything. The fake violation notices, the late-night trash vandalism, the constant surveillance. I even played the footage from my phone, showing everyone Karen dumping my trash like an unhinged raccoon. When I finished, one of the other board members, an older gentleman named Frederick, cleared his throat. "Karen, is this true?" he asked, looking genuinely shocked. Karen stammered, This is being blown out of proportion. He's a troublemaker, always breaking rules." "What rules?" I interrupted, maintaining my steady voice. "Please, Karen, tell us exactly what rule I've broken." She couldn't, and the board saw through it. The next day, I received a call from the officer handling my case. He informed me they had spoken to Karen and issued her a formal warning for vandalism. Apparently, she had tried to play the victim, claiming she was merely protecting the neighborhood, But the footage didn't lie. The officer didn't provide many details, but it was clear Karen wasn't as confident when faced with law enforcement. That should have been the end of it, but Karen wasn't done embarrassing herself. A week later, I woke up to find a bright orange sign staked into my front yard. It read, "Violation, property in disarray," in large, bold letters. Below it was a handwritten note. "Failure to comply will result in further action." I couldn't help but laugh. At this point, it was just pathetic. Did she really think this sign would intimidate me after everything that had already transpired? Instead of removing the sign, I took a picture of it and emailed it to the entire HOA board with the subject line, "Is this what we're spending HOA funds on?" Within an hour, Frederick called me. "Shane, I want you to know the board is holding an emergency vote to remove Karen as president. This has gone too far." The emergency meeting was brief and to the point. The board unanimously voted to strip Karen of her position, citing abuse of power and misconduct. She didn't even attend to defend herself, which was probably her smartest move throughout this ordeal. After the meeting, Amy, the neighbor who had warned me, approached me and said, "I think you just did this whole neighborhood a favor.